Scary Reddit stories. It had a human face. It was the middle of autumn and all the trees were bare. As we drove down the wooded area of the highway, a peaceful drive like every year when my wife Mandy and I would head east from New Jersey to see her parents in the next state over, we would come across car accidents and the occasional poor animal that didn't have the mind of caution of the road. Few times I had to do what was right and put the poor things out of their pain and suffering. Don't understand why people would just leave them like that. Saddening and cruel, but I did what I had to do. This one particular trip, which was last year, just happened to be one of the most memorable times. Not because of visiting my wife's parents, of what we encountered on the way. There is what scarred us. Driving while the sun had begun to set. Radio blasting alternative rock, while Mandy had her feet on the dashboard relaxing and playing some mediocre game on her phone. The road seemed more desolated of any other cars, which was just how I liked it. The setting was just so perfect and relaxing with being able to see the road ahead perfectly. As we drove I noticed something off in the distance, and I quickly turned the radio down and reached to my right to tap Mandy on the shoulder. As I came to a slow stop, she looked my way as I pointed ahead and she seen what I had seen. She sighed not another one and I looked back at her and rested my head on the steering wheel. Yep, she knew what I was going to do, so she got out of the car. As I popped the trunk to get a blunt object out of the trunk, I could see her slowly approaching the poor animal as I peeked around the back and pulled out a tire iron. As I closed the trunk and came around the side of the car, I suddenly heard her gasp and run back toward the side of the car with her hands cupped over her mouth. James, that's not an animal. Just as I was passing her and could see just how visibly shaken she was. What are you talking about? I slowly approached the said animal and I came to a dead stop in my steps to what I was looking at, and I was utterly speechless. I took one step forward as I leaned in and could see this thing had human-like fingers that turned into a skinny form of some kind of canine leg. It laid on its side and could see what looked like the body of a dog, the hind leg stretched out from the back as if it was dragging itself on the road, followed by a trail of its own blood. I began to examine it at a slight distance. I put my foot on it and that's when it started to move, and it turned its head outward. This creature or thing had the head of a woman. The face was heavily deformed and looked as if it was in the middle of some kind of transformation. The other front leg of it had a fully grown hand of a human, and that's when it turned its focus towards me, opening its eye which had hair growing around the eyelids, but the nose and mouth of a woman. It began to cough a weak cough and I swear it started to smile even as I started to back away. The teeth of it was also very much human-like. I noticed the long hair coming off from the back of its head and could see it started to drag itself across the road, even as it gasped for air. My wife Mandy began tugging at my arm and took me back to the driver's side door as she went around and got into the passenger side. I turned on the car and shined the lights right on it, and we sat there watching this thing drag itself into the bushes. We were so much in shock that I almost had forgotten I was in the driver's seat and had to snap myself out of it, and we drove off. For nearly 2 miles we never said a word to each other. Mandy just sobbed and couldn't believe what we seen, and I was pretty much in denial myself. How could we even tell this to someone, and how would they even begin to believe what we saw? The only explanation I ever came up with was that it might have been a skinwalker. Maybe one that got hit by a car and was trying to change. I don't know, but this was one for the books. That would have never been read, cause even so, I am still in denial about it, and so is Mandy. Some days I wonder if it's still out there, but that bloody smile, human face with body of a canine still haunts my dreams. And I don't think it's going to leave me anytime soon. He who saw the end. For every person, the motivation to do something comes down to an expectation of an outcome. If you knew there was no outcome, you likely wouldn't do something. And even feeling happiness can be an outcome motivating action. But you don't know, going into things, never knowing what your outcome will be, you still act in hopes of a good outcome. But what if you could see? What if you knew the outcome of an action with full certainty? That is what Dr. Galvin Troff sought to discover. He desired the foresight to know whether something was worth pursuing or not. And his object of study was life. Dr. Troff believed that if he gained the energy of another life, he could see a lifetime ahead of him, which could be changed to his whim. He would take people off the streets to be his lab rats. The homeless, abandoned and suicidal, he would carve, stitch, melt, solder and marry together countless poor victims. His workshop held the incessant stench of smoldering flesh and rotting meat. Carrion cake tools littered the stations. By the end of his work, there was even a living mount, made of 3 coupled people, fused at the cheeks and ribs. All they did was moan in cacophonic agony. And one day, when his motivation for the day had started to wane, he made a breakthrough. He had paired 2 brains together, and the whole seemed functional. The being he made smashed itself into the wall until it was no more, but he expected as much. He would not do the same, he was certain. And so, Drive-Troff kidnapped a brilliant doctor from the local hospital. He knew the woman personally, but held no sympathy for his scientific breakthrough. Her sacrifice would yield would be, oh so worth it. He underwent the procedure, having given the only remaining sedatives exclusively to himself. It took 6 agonizing hours, 6 pauses of stimulating his failing body with electricity, and 6 seconds to finalize the procedure, and when he did, he saw nothing. His vision was a mire of murky fog. He could taste the torturously dry air on his face. He saw the future, but he saw more than he predicted. Dr. Troff saw the end of time itself. More information than one could comprehend. Do you find it beautiful, trespasser? A voice indescribable called from behind. He turned to face a large being, a mass of his victims. The face that had spoken was different, undefined, with eyes that blinded his retinas. When the police arrived, believing him to be the kidnapper of the good doctor, they saw it, all the viscera in his workshop. And at his workstation, they saw him, Dr. Galvin Troff, his face smeared and hammered into the desk, a second head bulging out the rear. He had seen the end, and it rejected him. He's back. When I was around 10, when I lived in a small town, in the middle of nowhere, that town was weird. No one slept with the lights off. I was always told never to turn off the lights, so I never did, but I didn't want to listen anymore. I hated sleeping with the lights on, so one night, when I was 13, I turned them off. I never should have done that. I heard a deep voice coming from the dark, but I was too scared to move. Then a man ran out from the dark towards me. The man didn't look human though. His face was gone. It was just bone and muscle, and his arm was only hanging on. He screamed and jumped on me. I couldn't breathe. Then I passed out. Once I woke up, all the lights were on, and there was a huge scar on my neck. After that I never slept with the lights off until last week. I thought because I didn't live in that town anymore, I could turn off the light. I was very wrong. Now I see him every night, even with the lights on. The screwer. In my city, a few months ago, a rumor started to spread about a serial killer who used a screwdriver to painfully stab his victims to death. Apparently, this murderer is still on the loose. But I kid you not, I think I'm 100% sure who this killer is, and he lives right by me. Johann Tiller is who I'm talking about. He is my neighbor. An old man who's probably in his 60s by now, but you'd be astonished at how strong he still is. He works as a repairman. Guess what repairmen use? Screwdrivers. Not just that, he has an unexplainably evil face. He looks rugged and like he's seen every atrocity on earth. He doesn't have a wife or kids. He's always silent. You'll always see him working on some hard labor without fail. No one in the neighborhood talks to him. We all avoid him. I'm pretty sure he has a criminal record as well. You get what I'm trying to say? This guy's presence doesn't sit right with me. But how am I gonna tell the police? I decided that tomorrow I'll muster up my courage and do it. But now I must sleep, so I went to bed, comfortably snuggled up in it and rolled around in all its coziness. Then my comfort was instantly struck down as I looked out the window. Can you guess who it was? Mr. Tiller. Sitting on a bench and facing my house. I let out an audible yelp as his eyes locked with mine from all the way where he's sitting. The yellow street light made him look even more nauseatingly malicious. I thought he was about to stand up and run at my house full speed any moment now, but he just kept staring. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a man walking on that same sidewalk. I watched as I knew something was about to happen to that man. Then he pulled out a screwdriver from his pocket, blew 5 holes in Mr. Tiller's chest without hesitation, and proceeded to drag him towards the park. Moss Tiller's blood flew in fountains. As he was being dragged into the darkness, I wish I was not an idiot. The mimic. I remember distinctly that, as a child, my house had a lot of creaky floorboards. We would sneeze and a chorus of unsettling cracks and pops would meet our ears. One night while I was sleeping, I heard a creak. It was slightly garbled, a bit different, almost artificial. I write it off as rats chewing our attic apart, which wasn't unheard of, and drifted back to sleep. Then I heard snoring. It almost sounded as if it were mine. My snores. I was beginning to get freaked out. Then I figured it was a trick of the wind or something. I once again fell back asleep. Then something happened that would stay with me even 21 years later. I heard my mother call to me from the attic. But at this point, I knew it wasn't my mother. I lay frozen in fear. As the thing continued to use my mother's voice, it got more frustrated. And when it got mad, the voice would distort. I will never forget when I saw Yellow Eye, crazed and angry, staring at me through a crack in my wall. As my mother's voice continued on, beginning to threaten me with punishments. The next day, we found the family dog's corpse. 100 upvotes for part 2, I guess. Edit. Actually just 10 would do. Thanks for listening, guys. Sorry it's a bit late. There will be another coming shortly.